machine learning. So I think his perspectives are highly relevant on what's going on in the industry. And so I think we'll just start out, Alex, if you could just kind of give the audience a little bit of background on what you do in the Institute and what you guys are working on.
Yeah, thank you very much for inviting me. So I'm a professor here at UT Austin in the Electrical and Computer Engineering Department. And I'm also the co-director of an NSF-funded institute that we have here in UT. It's led by UT, but other universities are also participating, and we do research on the foundations of machine learning, and my actual expertise is on generative AI. In fact, I'm very happy that I can now say generative AI and everybody knows what I mean. You know, 3 years back, I had to explain that I'm training neural networks that produce images, and that sounded like a very bizarre thing to do. But now I guess everybody understands. So we've been working on research for these topics, and I can dive in more details as people are interested.
One thing a question I have, it seems people use machine learning and AI interchangeably. What is the actual difference? Are they the same thing, subset? What's the nuance there?
Yeah, usually artificial intelligence, I mean, the joke is that you see it when you're pitching for a startup, you write AI, but when you're actually doing the hiring, you want to hire machine learning people. So the machine learning is a more specific subtype of AI, but it is driving all the deep learning stuff that we're talking about today are all machine learning. So it's a type of AI. There are other types of AI that are not using machine learning, but they're not as popular today. And also AI sometimes includes robotics, which is a little bit, so AI is a broader term, but both are, I think, valid.
So it was only a year ago when DALL-E 2 kind of exploded onto the scene, and when Leslie was showing earlier, 100 million users in 2 months. I guess that was just GPT, but what actually happened? Like, you've been working in this area for years. What was the tipping point where everything just exploded onto the scene a year ago?
Yeah, so there's, I think, 3 things that happened. The first one probably, I don't know if it's the most important because you need all 3, but the first one is the creation of the data set. And this relates to our previous conversation, so I just want to reiterate for everyone so that everyone knows. So the first thing is data is not the problem, because people, as you know, on Instagram, on Reddit, on social networks, upload a lot of images all the time, like billions of images, right? So there's a lot of data on the internet. The problem is not, you didn't even have to actually download it. We never download it. We just create big lists that are just pointing to the original links hosted by the original website. So the challenge was really a data curation problem more than a data collection problem. So the data sets that are used by the big companies, with DALL-E 2 was trained by OpenAI with proprietary data that nobody knows and nobody could replicate, right? So they created a data set which was at a huge scale, was in the millions of images, we believe, nobody else had the data set. So only OpenAI could have this magic, right? And then there was a big effort that was created by many groups that wanted to make open, competitive products that took the common crawl, which is basically the internet, and they created a data set called Lion. Lion is a filtering of the internet that just selects the best matching images. And again, it's a list of links and captions. And that is what was used to train Stable Diffusion, which is public data. And then there was, at the same time, the same month, I believe, Imagine was the Google model, again trained on proprietary data, also, I think, using Lion. So one key innovation was the creation of those higher quality public data sets that enabled a lot of the, I should say not enabled, but rather democratized the training of those models outside the 2 or 3 big companies that would otherwise have the data, because we have all given them access to our images. Like, so when you upload images on Google or Instagram or many social networks, you are giving licenses that I don't know if anybody has read, and they are allowed to train on those images, and they're allowed to use those images, I suppose, for commercial purposes, and nobody complains about that. And whereas when the data set is created that's public for everybody, including universities or small startups to use, that's when it actually is a lawsuit involved. So that's one of my, complaints there. Yeah.
Just the perception of that it's not physical scraping of these images, but just indexes that have been being used in the training of the data sets.
That's right.
Yeah. So then, there's this fundamental question about authorship for the works that are output from these models. Where do you come down on that? Like, who is the author? Is there an author? Because clearly, we mentioned the Copyright Office's reversal on Zarya at the Dawn. Well, they said, okay, your compilation and your copy is copyrightable. The actual image generation, now that we know that you use Midjourney, there's actually no human authorship, and so we're revoking that. I mean, from your perspective, is that a fair assessment? Would you have gone the other way? I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah. So first is I'm an engineer. I'm not a legal scholar, and I don't understand the legal details. But my rough understanding is that if the authorship, if something is very short, like a punchline, it cannot be copyrighted. And I think in the same way, if a prompt is an image of a dog or an image of an elephant in a watering hole, you cannot copyright the prompt because it's so trivial to do that the fact now that you feed this trivial prompt into a huge machine and it generates an amazing image means that, okay, I came up with a prompt, but somebody like a judge would have to be convinced that there was sufficient ingenuity or in the authorship. I think this is not going to be an issue because the tools already are exposing more knobs and whistles in the Creative Act. I don't think that the creativity of the future will be just type a prompt, run an image and be done. There's already, if you use Midjourney and Runway and these stability derivative products, they will give you, first of all, multiple degrees of freedom to control your generation process by changing your seed, by adding negative keywords. So you say, I want an image of an elephant, but not in the style of Klimt, and maybe in the lighting style of this photographer, but without this or that. So you can have multiple tools, and you also will have multiple images. So you will actually, I believe the future of generative AI will not be that we just type a text and get an image. You will actually edit the image. And we are developing the tools, and not only in my university, but many others, where you generate an image. You like this part, but you don't like this part. So you can actually mark this part and say, this part I want more contrast. Then you can mark this part and say, this part I want more edges. So you can literally describe this either by language or by basically like Photoshop tools augmented with AI. And in that, once we get to that stage, and I think we're getting to that stage very, very quickly, because I also saw a desensitization to awesomeness that happened in a time scale of days, right? So, when I was doing this research, in 2017, we were doing 32 pixels by 32 pixels of faces. And if I show them to you, they look like, Mario or something now. They look like a joke. But when we first got them, I was like, wow, that's amazing. They look like real faces. And then, after a few weeks, we're like, okay, fine, they're not that awesome. We just had never seen this before. Then StyleGAN came out, StyleGAN 2 came out. We're like, whoa, that looks almost real. And then it actually looked real. And now Stable Diffusion came out and can generate anything. So there's a wow factor. People go viral on social media for a week. And then we're all like, okay, sure, fine, yet another set of images. So creativity will very quickly use extra layers of blendings and authorship. Very quickly, because you will not be able to impress anybody the third time you're doing this, right? You will be able to impress somebody the first time you're doing it. But I think, so I'm not worried about authorship because I think the tools will expose more creativity and then people will be able to play with authorship.
Yeah, and again, this is probably more of a legal comment, but it's going to be very interesting to see how the copyright comes down on images that are output from the AI, but are based on images fed into the system by the artists themselves, which is a common practice. So basically, they'll upload their own photo, then enter a prompt to augment that image, and then they have a actually testing this right now, registering images that were created in this way to see what the Copyright Office says. But you know, I think one of the biggest things that concerns creators right now is they love these tools. You know, I mean, they're truly amazing from a technical perspective. But how do you survive if that's your career and you're using them to create works, but then you don't actually have ownership of them, and therefore are not able to protect them? So that's going to be really interesting, I think, to see what happens here. You know, the expression "the tip of the iceberg" has come up a few times now today already. In your view, is this really the tip of the iceberg, or is this the iceberg? I mean, it's upon us. Where do you see it going?
I think it's there's infinitely many more things that will be done very quickly. The first one is video. So already in video, there's a ton of research labs in industry and universities trying to do the same things in video. Then it will be interactive tools that will make your own. You can film an amazing film in your backyard with, you know, a cell phone, and you will get automatic green screen, automatic amazing effect. So I think these things are happening. We are working on solving engineering problems like accelerated medical imaging. MRI images are also images, and right now it takes 45 minutes to get a scan. But we have trained a diffusion model for MRI that allows you to get a scan in 10 minutes as opposed to 45, which also would mean you can scan 4 times more people or reduce the cost by a factor of 4. So I think that in medical imaging is one application where we think that we can make things much cheaper, or we can do imaging of beating hearts with MRI, something that's impossible right now. I think that in all kinds of astronomy, all kinds of optical microscopy, all kinds of scientific applications, you want to image or generate things based on few measurements. We have another project on generating proteins. So the same way that you're generating text, you can generate a sequence of amino acids, and you can ask, generate a protein that will bind to this virus and so on for therapeutics. So I think that it's an incredible new tool and can solve a lot of big problems and make us, you know, more productive or faster or safer in many ways. So it's an incredible tool. I think it's, I guess, the tip of the iceberg. Yeah.
So I'm curious, I'll get to you in just a second. At the AI Institute, are you actually working on these specific applications, or are there researchers working on applications that are leveraging the work that you've done?
No, we're actually working on, like, we're literally training, like me and my students are literally training a diffusion model on MRI. We've been doing this for like a year, and then on the proteins we have more than 8 months of one project. So I'm involved in the projects, which typically involve 5 to 20 researchers.
And then, like, how long does this, I mean, it varies obviously from project to project, but is this something that you hope to see, like, commercialized in 5 years, 10 years, 1 year?
Oh, commercialization is very complicated, depends on the domain, but we hope to publish the first research paper that's peer-reviewed in the time scale of 6 months to a year, and then the research community, you know, picks up on it, and there's a whole research community, and from the community you have to get to approvals and getting something, you know, used in practice. There is the barrier from using something in medical imaging is obviously, gladly, much bigger than making a website and this happens. But the research community is already on these things. Like, it's not only us. There's 20 groups that are training, you know, generative models for biology. So,
Leslie, I think you had a question.
You mentioned medical imaging and how you can speed up the results. And I assume the speeding up the results is interpolating the data a bit?
sort of, yes.
So is there an issue with accuracy like we're seeing in some
Absolutely.
other areas?
Absolutely. It's the same problem as photography. And I want to make a remark that we showed images already, and we say, are these images real, right? And if you use a phone today, Pixel 7, AI is in the algorithm that takes the pixels. That's why you can take pixels at night. You can take a photograph with a tiny lens on a Pixel 7, the low lighting conditions. This is created with AI. There's a magic eraser that you may have used. This is an AI product. Is that a real image? I mean, I don't think so. And my follow-up problem with that is that we have already created a huge problem by manipulated images because, as you know, through social media, there's an epidemic of depressions among adolescents who are seeing images which don't exist, right? And they say they have to look like them. And this is not a joke. This is if you look at the data, there is a huge problem we have already created in our society. And some small companies, some big companies have become insanely rich by leveraging this addiction that people have to the visual elements already, right? So going back to, is AI breaking fundamental things in our society? Already this is happening to a large extent. And I'm quite concerned about that, and I'm quite concerned about only 2 companies or 3 companies having these tools. So a big part of us as a university is opening up this toolbox so that at least you can have an ecosystem and have some competition rather than just having 1 company or 2 doing this.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
So in Europe in particular, there are countries that are trying to tighten the laws, and I've spoken to a couple of people who've said that they think there should be some sort of identifier if an image is generated with AI or generative AI. What do you feel about that?
I think that will not make sense because, as I said, any image, any Instagram filter, any image, actually even your CMOS sensor in your camera is using image processing that is going to become AI right now. And I understand the struggles with regulating AI. I also serve on an AI Chamber of Commerce Commission for regulating AI here, and we have been discussing these issues. There's a line you have to walk between protecting, rights, copyright, privacy rights, super important, and stifling innovation. And then always the bad problem is this innovation is going to happen, right? Either at other countries or within the closed walls of a huge company that owns everything and nobody can even know they're doing it. And the problem is, if you regulate, how are you changing the environment? Are you changing it towards the better or the worse, right? And that's what we debate in Generative. But to say, is this image generated or not? I think all images will be generated, depending on what generated means. Yeah.
Another area that's causing a lot of consternation, and I'd love to ask you this question as a professor, is in education. So with students having access to these tools like ChatGPT, what concerns you about that? What issues are popping up with students just turning to that instead of doing the work themselves and so forth?
Yeah, so ChatGPT is amazing. It impressed even the people who made it, and it's still impressing them. I think it is popularizing, it's basically trivializing bullshit, right? So there were people who were good at bullshitting and they could just write a lot of text and say nothing. Now it's just become an automatic thing. So similarly, arithmetic, the ability to do arithmetic in your brain. We would call somebody who would add 4-digit numbers in the brain a genius, but now we just call it like a party trick because we have calculators, right? So we don't consider a calculator to be an ingenious machine. We just say, okay, sure, it's just doing something. So in an exam, in-person exam, I can allow or not allow calculators, right? In the same way, I can allow or not allow ChatGPT. It doesn't matter because people could always, instead of being on ChatGPT, they would have a friend on a chat and have their, or even worse, in terms of inequity, a lot of richer kids could afford to have people doing their homeworks for them, right? And in universities, there's a whole industry, as you may know, where they were paying people to. So ChatGPT is the democratization of cheating, right? So in that sense, it actually makes a more level playing field. And if I want my kids to take an exam where I know nobody's helping them and I know that they're not cheating, I do the exam in the room, right? That's why we have exams in rooms. And I think that that's what's going to happen with exams. Like if you have an exam, you take it in a closed room, and I specify if I allow a calculator, I specify if I allow Googling, I specify if I allow, it basically depends what I want to test as an educator. So I think there's a lot of stress about that, but I don't think it's a big deal because people were cheating already. People will just have friends who are doing their homework for them.
Yeah, I mean, and certain subjects lend itself to where you can test them in a room, but writing, to me, you're not going to sit there and write a research paper or an essay in a room in an hour. So to me, that's still Yeah.
But you cannot, like ChatGPT cannot write like Microsoft Windows or do one of my projects. If ChatGPT could write Microsoft Windows, we would have much bigger problems than the students cheating. Because if ChatGPT can do something, it is by definition trivial. Okay? So it's like adding numbers, right? So it's like I'm telling you, I'm training the students to add numbers. They're very good, they can add 5-digit numbers. That's a stupid skill to teach, right? Now, if people spend their life being numerical calculators, yes, they're going to have to find another job now. It's bad for them. And that is happening. But when I'm teaching, if they can do it with ChatGPT, I shouldn't be teaching that. I tell them to use ChatGPT, actually. Please do it and tell me how you're using it. And they are using it to write code. But they're using it in an interactive way again. They say, give me this function, and then it's usually wrong. And then they have to debug it. And debugging it is sometimes harder than writing it from scratch. But it helps them. It's an educational tool. It's amazing. And that's all good. I'm not worried. Now, if I want to, have an exam, I have to proctor the exam. Yeah.
So, thought I'd take a few minutes to just turn it over. Anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask?
I can always come up with a question. I have a question. What do you think, where is it headed? I mean, you just made the comment of what ChatGPT creates is by its nature trivial. But where do you see this headed?
Yeah, I'm not saying it's trivial. I'm saying the skill, it trivializes that skill. In the same way that adding numbers, doing arithmetic is not trivial. It's very difficult. Or playing chess is not trivial,
But
right?
it becomes less important.
But it's not going to be monetizable in the same way, right? So it's going to be, the economics of it are going to be changing, and I think we'll see profound changes in all industries, and my biggest concern is what can the universities and the open institutions do to move towards a better equilibrium rather than a worse one, right? So that's really what I'm most worried about, is what things will be closed. Like ChatGPT right now, there is no open ChatGPT, okay? There's only one ChatGPT, it's owned by OpenAI, we don't know the data set, and we cannot replicate it. We are working very hard to create a Lion equivalent data set to replicate ChatGPT, and I think that will be crucial for an open society and an open economy to have such tools in the public. If you have one company owning it, it's super scary, right? It's like having nuclear weapons and only one company owns it. Imagine that, right?
You make a really good point about the information. I was trying to do this presentation, and I put into ChatGPT, list all of the public tools available for generative AI. And it listed quite a few, but then it came up and it said, my data is limited to up to 2021. So there may be newer tools. And it was interesting because I didn't, you think about that, but obviously there was some sort of limitation to the training data they used, and it came out and said that. So I do think, understanding and being able to ensure that people understand the limitations of these systems is a real thing as well.
Absolutely, and also data provenance. It will produce answers, especially if you ask it, is there a research paper that showed that drinking chlorine is good for your liver, right? It will produce a very plausible citation and a very plausible research abstract for anything you want, and because that's how it's trained. Now, people should be very careful not using it as a search engine, because it's coming up with stuff. Yes.
Yeah, and I know other people have used it, and it gives you a lot of very basic information, and if you ask it more than once, you'll get different information each time, but it doesn't give you insights. So it'll give you the basic facts, but not the human insights.
I think people should use it primarily as a writing tool.
It's like a first draft, like a bad first draft.
Or say, write an email to my colleague about inviting him to a party. We'll give you. Then write it in a Shakespearean way. So just for fun. Or then add some gangster language. So add another paragraph about how we were playing poker together. So think of it like a writing tool. Don't use it like a Google search engine.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say, there's all this hype around generative AI, and first it was blockchain, and that's sort of died down a bit. And then it was the metaverse, and this is just the next hyped thing. And it's not, not as groundbreaking as people make it out to be. Do you think that's true? And if it's different from those other really hyped things that ultimately, you know, don't seem to be as impactful as people thought. Why is it different?
Yeah, so I think that artificial intelligence in general is going to be a real thing, and it's already it's already, for example, driving search, okay? Google search alone is 100 million, I don't even know how many billion-dollar business, right? So if you make that 1% more efficient, that's already, you know, a huge deal. So there are already billion-dollar impacts as opposed to the metaverse, as opposed to, you know, other hype cycles that we have all seen in our life. So now, is it generative AI? We would call it generative AI. We will come up with a new name in 5 years. We may come up with another name. That's just branding. But I think that there's real stuff going on, and it's really transformational for some industries. I mean, writing code. I mean, we didn't talk about that at all, but that's the biggest insane copyright violation. Copilot is training on everybody's code, and it proposes code completions. Like, I was surprised we didn't talk about that. That is a huge, like, code. Like, a lot of people spend their life writing code, right? And now everybody's using ChatGPT as a tool. It's making it faster. But if it becomes better and better, some of those jobs will be displaced.
Yeah, and just kind of along the lines of Tom's question, you know, in my lifetime, there's been two technologically driven developments that have really fundamentally reshaped society. One, the internet, and two, smartphones, and having persistent connectivity with everybody, always on your person. Do you feel like this is a third to that degree?
I think so, but I don't know how it will play out. But I certainly think there is potential for complete transformations of industry, yes.
Right, well, I think our schedule's been a little fluid today, but if anybody has any other questions, go for it.
I have a question. Actually, it's two-part. You mentioned jobs could be eliminated. 5 years down the road, do you foresee what jobs could potentially be eliminated and what new jobs can come out of it? And in addition to that, will curriculums follow? And I'm interested to learn like where you see curriculums going, especially in higher ed.
Yeah, so my tweet on this, like which jobs I think will be most affected, was that the tragedy of the highbrow human society is that the jobs that we consider our greatest achievements, writing poetry or painting or, you know, creating images, were the ones who turned out to be the easiest to replace compared to changing diapers and things like this that we're very far from. So I think that jobs that deal with taking care of other people are the safest. I think that many jobs will not be eliminated, but will be transformed. But of course, transformation and elimination are very closely related, because if you make a graphic designer 100 times more effective because they can do 100 times more work, that means that only 1 out of 100 graphic designers is going to remain in business unless the business grows. But overall, making people more efficient and democratizing, as we say, something also means, you know, usually really hurting a sector, right? So I think that creating images, creating videos, which is much bigger than creating images, are going to be drastically transformed. I don't know exactly in what way. I think that writing has already been drastically transformed, but it was already obliterated by Google and Facebook by taking their lifeline, which was advertising already, right? So that's another remark, like writing, like reporting and so on, was obliterated before, not because people couldn't write, but because the revenue wasn't writing, the revenue was advertising, and the advertising revenue already was obliterated in them. So I think that some industries will be, like driving. I mean, honestly, one of the biggest questions is, you know, if we have self-driving trucks, that's going to be a very, very big deal also.
Yeah, and I think within the creative industry, what's so vexing is that if you look back, you know, there's always been technologies that have, you know, may have been perceived as threats, but were really just tools, like Photoshop, for example. And so if you're a creator, you learn how to use Photoshop and you can do all this new stuff. But what's different this time, at this point, is let's say you're a creator and you decide to adopt these tools, but then you don't have any copyright ownership in them. And so what happens to the market if you have creators that are spending their time and energy and resources creating works, but then don't actually own it?
No, but then you can take the generated and Photoshop that, and now you own it, right? So, and I think that's how we will circumvent that technicality. Because you will not just prompt and get an image. You will just work enough on it, and you can always at the very end take your image. You have it. You put it on Photoshop. You edit it on Photoshop. And now the final thing is a combination of 20 tools. Nobody knows how long you spent in each tool.
Yeah.
Now you have authorship, so that's done.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we're doing is, again, I go back to, there's a photographer who teaches at University of New York as well, and this is a big issue with her students, and she's actually fed a lot of her photographs into, Midjourney and others, and then created these works. So, in one sense, the output could be considered a derivative of their original photo, but then if you want to go and register that with the Copyright Office, and we're working with some of our copyright attorneys on this, do you necessarily have to exclude the original photograph, the limitation of the claim, because that's already possibly been registered, and then you're left with what the AI generated, which has been shown to not be copyrightable because it's not human authorship. So you have these works that you can create, and so how do you control that and monetize that, or protect it? So yeah, some pretty interesting questions in this whole area. So Brittany said you had two
I
questions.
was
Is that one more?
interested in how will it impact new curriculums in higher education?
Yeah, so we are trying very hard to introduce data science and machine learning into our curriculum, and there's also efforts at lower levels, like from high school to introduce AI. This has to be done as there is workforce is going to be transformed, but it also has to keep. One thing I say on that is it's crucially important to keep mathematics, fundamentals, calculus, for example. There's been an initiative to remove calculus, replace it with data science, for example. This has been, many states have had such ideas. And it turns out to be a disaster, because when I'm teaching machine learning to the college kids, the problem is not that they don't know Python, the problem is they don't know calculus, okay? So what's actually driving these amazing breakthroughs is calculus. It's actually math. And if you want to be able to write the next Midjourney or work at Midjourney or these companies, you need calculus. The Python you can pick up easily, actually. So of course you need to teach them how to code, but the fundamentals have to stay. And that's, again, something that we are carefully designing and discussing.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're probably good to go. So thank you, Alex, very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.